narcissistic personality disorder is different in that, yes, it lacks empathy. And what may appear to be empathetic in narcissists is oftentimes, well, is majority of the time, it's purposeful, kind of a facade. They're faking empathy. They're pretending they have empathy, or they know cognitively they should be empathetic in this particular situation, but they know they don't feel it, but they know they're supposed to act that way, so they do.
Hi, I'm Kelly Namiro. Welcome to the Balancing Chaos podcast, a lifestyle podcast where we'll talk about wellness, motherhood, and some really exciting things in between. My goal is to help you develop a lifestyle that promotes health, wholeness, and success. Through my conversations with our experts and guests, I hope to inspire you to live a beautiful, full, and joyful life as you navigate balancing the chaos. Welcome back, everybody, to the Balancing Chaos podcast. Today, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Jaime Zuckerman, a licensed clinical psychologist and national expert in narcissistic abuse. Dr. Zuckerman is not only a highly sought-after relationship coach for those experiencing narcissistic abuse, but also is the sole owner and founder of the Z Group, a private therapy practice specializing in anxiety, depression, and complex relationship dynamics. Beyond her clinical practice, Dr. Zuckerman is an accomplished and active social media contributor and media contributor, and she shares her expertise on various platforms. Her influence extends beyond social media, where she is recognized as an influential figure in the mental health space. Today, Dr. Zuckerman joins us to delve into the intricate dynamics of narcissistic abuse, exploring its impact on both mental and physical health, and the importance of establishing and maintaining boundaries, and so much more. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Dr. Zuckerman.
Hi, thank you. Can you read that to my kids so they think I'm cool?
I love that. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Wow.
How many kids do you have?
3.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So with all of that said, I'm very curious. I always wonder about people's backgrounds kind of before we talk about narcissists, and narcissism and how that creates all of these variety of emotions. How did you get specifically? I feel like this is so niche.
Yeah.
Why narcissism?
I've always been fascinated by it. I've been fascinated by the brain in general. And then I just kind of, just from seeing patients over the years for so long, it was just something that was never really talked about.
Yeah.
Yet so many people were going through it and they had no name for it. They had no idea. They didn't talk about it because they thought they were crazy. So they felt so alone. And so I just felt like, most of my patients at the time were women, not that, all narcissists are men, they're not, but at the time they were women. And I just felt that, kind of this obligation to not just help them, but also just get this out there in a language that wasn't so clinical, in a way that people would actually understand it and be able to make sense of it.
Right. Yeah. I think that that's super helpful. It's funny. My husband and I, we have been going to therapy for I think 2 years now, between the two of us. And our therapist, when we first started, we were talking about our issues and what was going on in our marriage. And it's helped us understand each other so much. But he was like, you're on the spectrum of narcissism and your husband's on the spectrum of sociopath. And we're like, oh my God, that's so scary.
Really?
So I want to know, is there actually a spectrum for these things? Or is it you are a narcissist or you're not a narcissist?
So it's going to depend. Short answer is depends who you ask,
Okay.
right? But, we all have certain traits about us, right? We all have, I don't like saying healthy narcissism, but I don't know how else to put it. We all have certain traits about ourselves. You look at professional athletes, you look at CEOs of companies, you look at people who have, that are successful or that are really good at something. In those moments of their talent, or in those moments of something that they're very passionate about, their narcissistic traits may be a little heightened, right? But that's not the same thing as lack of empathy. And it's not the same thing as not caring about how your behavior hurts others. And it certainly doesn't mean you're manipulative. You could be, the best in your field at something, but that has nothing to do necessarily with how you treat people. So I think is it on a spectrum in terms of characteristics? Yeah, and maybe certain people have more than others, but when you're talking about a personality disorder, you're
Mm,
talking about a set of characteristics that are pervasive, meaning they don't shift.
yeah.
They are there, they are like crystallized, they don't move. If they move, it's because the person's, kind of hiding them. They're always there. And
Yeah.
so for people that, let's say, are on the spectrum, it could just be in certain situations, maybe I'm more difficult to deal with than in other situations. Maybe in certain situations, I have less awareness about my behavior because it really is a trigger to me.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it has to do with if you and your husband are able to acknowledge to each other, all right, this is a situation where I kind of go off rails a little bit, and you're able to reel it back in. That's not narcissistic personality disorder, and it certainly is not sociopath.
Yeah, I think that what you said is so interesting because I can see certain qualities of mine where I'm like, oh, like I do relate a lot of things, back to myself, or like
Yeah.
there are some ways where I'm like, I want to, get my work at it, like where I am
Yes.
selfish. It's
Yes.
like I don't lack empathy. I absolutely
Correct.
understand how other people are thinking and feeling. And so I would love it if you could explain to our audience, like, give us the true definition of somebody who is a narcissist with like that personality disorder.
Yeah. So somebody with, let me tell you what it's not. Let me tell you what it's not. So people who are
Beautiful.
listening to this are like, oh my shit, I'm a narcissist. I knew it. I knew it all this time. So like for example, today something happened with one of my kids and I was explaining it to my husband, and I realized in the conversation I was having with him that the way I viewed what had happened was so self-focused and so self-absorbed that I was actually embarrassed at myself.
Mm.
And I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe I looked at it like that. I'm so sorry. So I think that's a perfect example of, somebody who maybe in the moment
Reacted.
just didn't think about anything else but themselves, but not maliciously. It's just, I always joke, I'm like, oh, I'm an only child. So I grew up thinking, that this, if I leave shoes in the middle of the floor, it's fine because I'm the only one that steps over them. But now there's like four other people here. I can't do that anymore. It's like, it's different than like unhealthy patterns that when you are aware of it, you want to shift because you don't want somebody else to get hurt. Right. So narcissistic personality disorder is different in that, yes, it lacks empathy. And what may appear to be empathetic in narcissists is oftentimes, well, is majority of the time, it's purposeful kind of a facade. They're faking empathy. They're pretending they have empathy, or they know cognitively they should be empathetic in this particular situation, but they know they don't feel it, but they know they're supposed to act that way, so they do. Um,
So you're trying to like
they
trick someone.
they're either trying to trick somebody or they're trying to fit in,
Okay.
because they don't want to look deficient in any way.
Because they
So they
want to
kind
think
of,
they're better than other people.
they don't, yeah, they want to, not even that they're better, but they don't, they don't want to look bad.
Yeah.
They just don't want to look bad. They don't want to look bad. They don't want to look wrong. They don't want to look weird. They want to, yeah, they want to stand out and be, be noticed and get that kind of, that reward from people, or that supply, or that, constant admiration. But they use other people oftentimes as social references for emotions to know how they should feel or act, and pretend to act that way. They know they're pretending. They know that they don't feel that way. They're cognitively aware of that. And then, we always hear about the grandiose ideas. So what that really means out of kind of a clinical sense is it's not just somebody that thinks they're amazing, right? Because there's plenty of people we know that think, they're amazing, but we know deep down they're insecure. And then when you really talk to them one-on-one, they tell you like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. They come off really selfish or really self-absorbed. That trait alone does not make somebody a narcissist. Okay. So when somebody is self-absorbed or selfish, in addition to all these other things, meaning they are super charming. They come off maybe even very philanthropic. They're very giving to the community. Everybody loves them. They're funny. People like to be around them. But then behind closed doors, they turn it off just like that, and they are somebody totally different, and they are abusive and they're manipulative. So that's why, when people oftentimes say narcissists can't control their anger, it's a very big misconception. They're actually very skilled at controlling their anger, because somebody could be home with their spouse. They could be mentally abusing the crap out of them, screaming, lashing out. And then the phone rings and hello.
Mhm.
They're very skilled at that. And yes, they are aware that they're doing it, or else they wouldn't be able to switch like that.
That's really fascinating. So it's the charm, the kind of like outward, you know,
Or they play the victim a lot,
but
right?
and the manipulative
Yeah.
ability that turns on whenever
Yep.
they need it to.
Yep.
Part I didn't really
They
understand.
also don't like criticism. They hate being even if you're not critical, even if you said to me, oh Jamie, I have that sweater. I may perceive that as you saying that my sweater's common. Like, and how dare you call me out on what I'm wearing? Like they'll take it and they'll twist it. So anything, it's not just criticism, it's perceived criticism, which is very different.
That's really interesting.
So they can lash out because of that.
I'm wondering if like somebody who gets this diagnosis, right? And they are in like working with you or working with a therapist,
They won't be.
they what?
They won't
They
be
won't
work.
be. They
No.
won't choose to work with you. So
So they're
you're working with the
rarely,
partners often.
yeah, yeah.
Ah,
No, there are some people, don't get me wrong, that do work with narcissists, but it's I know people get very angry when I say this because they think it's stigmatizing, but it's really just kind of describing what is accurate, is that narcissists rarely present for treatment. If they present for treatment, it is couples therapy where they're using that situation to manipulate the other therapist, or to manipulate the therapist to make themselves look good. It's custody therapy within family courts, which is a whole other disaster. And so they're using that kind of as their playground, or it's court mandated, or they're very depressed about something because life's not going their way. But then once they're done being depressed, they're done. It's not because
they want to
they're
work.
narcissists. No. Mm-mm.
That is fascinating.
Mm-mm.
So can these people, that like totally changes the question I was going to ask. And I want to go back to what was in my mind, but can these people actually get help? Or like, is this really like a clinical issue that's like rarely solved?
It's a clinical issue that's rarely solved.
It's really interesting.
And I know people listening are gonna hate me for saying that.
No,
And
but
and I always say this, like, understand that, and I say that I speak for all psychologists when I say this. Like, for a psychologist or any mental health professional, and again, don't get me wrong, not everyone agrees with this, majority do. For a psychologist to say that it's very unlikely that somebody can change, like that takes everything for me to say that, because that goes against everything that I do, right? So it is for a narcissist, not for someone with narcissistic personality disorder, to voluntarily present for treatment, be open and vulnerable enough to even be willing to change with somebody who is, let's say, one of the top people in the country who work with narcissists, because they do exist. They'll even tell you that the change that they make is so minimal, and that's only in session with a professional. You go outside that session, I mean, it's not going to generalize, and if it does, it's very short-lived. So this is why it's probably one of the only situations that I will tell somebody who comes to me who's in this type of relationship that their alternative is stay and it's going to get worse, or leave.
That's really interesting. So when you're working with, partners of these people, is that typically what you eventually come to?
Yeah. So
That's a really hard realization for the partner of one of these people. So
it's awful. I think the hardest part for people when they're coming is, I'll never tell anyone leave unless they're being hurt or their, kids are at risk for being hurt. But I don't ever tell anyone to leave, but I will give them their options. And, and I'm very truthful with it. And, because I think sometimes, to no fault of their own, I think sometimes therapists assume that every toxic pattern in somebody is changeable, fixable. And so, they may work with the person saying, well, why don't you guys have date night? Or, why don't you explain to them how you feel? That's not going to work with a narcissist. It may work with someone who's toxic, who has toxic learned patterns, but not a narcissist. And so I tell people, listen, I can either help you learn strategies to set boundaries within the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and stay and make it as best as you can with the understanding they're not going to change,
Mm-hmm.
or figure out a way for you to exit this relationship. And I think the hardest thing in intimate relationships with people is when they hit that realization, when they're with somebody with true narcissistic personality disorder, and they hit that point where they realize, oh my God, wait, so that, like, it's this realization that, like, well, did they ever care about me or the kids? Like, wait, what? Like, they'll leave and discard you as if you didn't exist, start a new family as if you didn't exist. So it's traumatizing for people to have that realization.
Yeah. And I can only imagine what that pain feels like, not just like the leaving part, but then it's like going into a new relationship and trying to trust someone and all of that.
Yeah.
It's just like so scary. So there are a million things on my mind right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
When it comes to like you just mentioned like intimate relationships,
Mhm.
right? And you talked a little bit about like, okay, how do these people present in life? But I feel like what you were saying about the manipulative behavior, like they could probably control that a lot until you end up in a marriage and then you're like, oh my God, this person's really manipulative. What the did I get
That's
myself
exactly what
into?
happens.
So how do we realize it before we walk down
Yeah,
the aisle?
I know, it's a great question. Sometimes you won't.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people will blame themselves, like, why didn't I see this? And I always say to people, unless you really know everything about this, and even then, like, I could still even, be susceptible to this. It's not an education thing, it's
Are
not
there
an
more
intelligence
people
thing.
who are like let's say you came from a certain upbringing or something that are more susceptible to be magnetized to these types of people?
So this is actually one of the most fascinating things about it, is that you would think that people who have extremely low self-esteem, who are super insecure, would gravitate towards narcissists. But
Mhm.
here's the thing: narcissists routinely go for people who are successful, who are, like, very confident with themselves, and very just kind of just solid, right? Or they're successful in or well known in their community, because the narcissist wants that person on their arm. They want that light. They want to share that. Where it gets really kind of unsettling is the reason why they want that. They want that is because if they are attracted to someone in the beginning that has no sense of self-esteem, compared to somebody who's up here with self-esteem, they have a way larger fall to bring them down. That's more supply for the narcissist.
Oh, so they get
And
high on
oh
hurting.
yeah, yes. Their goal is to literally break your soul. And so when that happens, years later into the relationship, now you have somebody who does not recognize themselves. I'll have so many people say, I feel like a shell of my former self. They have no self-confidence. Their self-identity has been stripped down. They don't even know, like, what colors they like, what music they like, because they've been
They're just
told,
trying to please that person,
yeah, they're
avoid
just trying to
conflict.
exist. And so when they leave the relationship, it's so scary for them, because they feel at this point they don't exist without the narcissist, because they've been so controlled for so long, but they didn't start out like that.
That's really, really
It's
interesting.
very
So the
slow. It's like a
narcissist
slow
is
leap.
trying to draw somebody in who has confidence so that they can make them fall. But like if let's say that like, you know, I'm working with you, you're like, oh, Kelly's, in a relationship with a narcissist. Is there anything that maybe happened in my childhood that draws me to the narcissist?
So in the beginning of intimate relationships with a narcissist, and everybody's heard the word love bombing, but let me like really talk about what this can look
Yeah,
like, because it's
please.
not like it can be like these like crazy vacations and gifts really early on, but it also can be super subtle. So it can be things like, you know, let's say for example that you make plans with them, and the next night they text you and they're like, I know we only went on one date, but I honestly can't stop thinking about you. And I know this is so last minute, but like, I would love to see you right now. Now, I'm not, if people are listening going, oh my God, well, that
That
happens to
happened to
me. And
me.
now, right now I'm 3 months in. Oh my God, they're a narcissist. No. But if it's something in addition to a whole bunch of other things, it's a red flag, because what that is, it's a couple things. One, they want to see if you're there with anybody else. Number one. Number two, they want to see if they're able to infiltrate your thoughts, your emotions, your moods, and your behaviors when they want to.
Mm.
So one of the things you can do in the beginning of a relationship, if you kind of want to test it out, let's say somebody's calling you, they'll in the beginning, they'll call you, text you constantly. And, if you ask what kind of things maybe, your upbringing would kind of trigger for you, I guess short answer would be maybe were neglected emotionally. And so now you have this person paying so much attention to you and you love it. But I always say this, I don't think you need to have had an emotionally neglectful upbringing to feel so
Like appreciate.
euphoric. Yeah, when you have this person paying so much attention to you. I mean, we're human beings, we love that, right? Like, who doesn't love that? So I think it's really hard to say. It's easier to say what makes kind of a narcissistic personality disorder, but
I was literally just going to ask you that too.
I think what happens, I think where the patterns come in, and I see this a lot with my clients, is that once the negative stuff starts coming out, like once they have you and now they start to the mask slowly starts to fall off and the manipulation really starts to come into full mode, the abuse comes in. If you are familiar with this intermittent, we call it kind of never knowing what you're going to get, walking on eggshells type of environment, then that toxic environment may feel very familiar to you. And we are experts in what's familiar to us, even if it's super unhealthy.
Yeah, totally.
So that's why people sometimes may stay, because it's familiar.
It's comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That makes sense. So when we think about the narcissist, right, and you think about the person who has this personality disorder, did something happen to them in their childhood was their parent a narcissist? Is this like, I feel like we hear now like so many things that we think are mental health, disorders or issues, like have this like genetic component. Is that something?
So there is research out there that says that, if you look at the brains, you'll see similar, I'm keeping this this is a very general overview, but
Sure.
there's, brain differences or there's genetic predispositions to this. But majority of the time, and I think majority of psychologists will tell you that it's really kind of the result of long-standing learned patterns of behavior and the impact it had on you developmentally, neurologically, cognitively, behaviorally, emotionally. So narcissistic parents you don't need to have a narcissistic parent to develop narcissistic personality disorder. What you do most likely have to have is a very chaotic, unstable, uncertain environment, abusive environment, neglectful environment, or I always give he's more sociopathic, but I always give the case of Scott Peterson and Lacey Peterson, if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
So Scott Peterson's mother, the way she spoke about him was so unbelievably disturbing, right? And like, I have a son, and listen, if my son was like a convicted murderer, would I still love him? Yeah, but like, would I be praising him? Probably not, right? And so I remember even in that moment, the way she spoke of him, he was this golden child. He could do no wrong. And so growing up, if you are treated as you can do no wrong, the rules do not apply to you. Every time you get in trouble, you get bailed out. There's no consequences to your actions. You feel no accountability, which I think I left out is a very big indicator of narcissism, this total lack of accountability. And if you're raised like that and your parents are treating you like that, well, then everybody should be treating you like that.
It's really interesting. I think that I love like that you brought in the parenting aspect of it, just because it kind of, I feel like there's been this kind of, I don't want to make this like generalization, but like push to be more like lenient with our kids and, like that's okay that you did that. Like, it's because you were feeling that or whatever. And like, not to say that we're all going to produce narcissists based on that, but I just think it's a really interesting
I think you bring up a very valid point though. And I think I do. And I think what you speak to is something called psychological immunity. And so I saw this all the time. When I used to see more like general therapy patients. I'm outside of Philadelphia, so I see a ton of St. Joe's, Villanova, Penn, Drexel students. There's a ton of college students around here. So I would see a ton of college students, mostly girls, who were the sweetest, smartest, came from amazing families, but had the absolute worst anxiety and depression. And their level of anxiety and depression did not match up to their upbringing. Like, you would not expect that level of, and it wasn't just me, it was like an epidemic. And I remember there was this non-scientific, but there was an article in the New York Times a gazillion years ago, and it talked about this concept of psychological immunity, where parents, exactly what you're saying, were, that generation were kind of handling not just the scenarios for their kids, but handling their emotions for them as well. So you had these children whose parents never wanted them to feel sad, never wanted them to do that. And while we don't want our kids to feel sad or unhappy or dissatisfied or angry, it is so important to let them feel it so that they learn how to self-regulate. Because if you don't, and then they go off to college and their boyfriend breaks up with them, or they don't get into the fraternity they want, or they get a B on a paper and they freak out, there's no one there to help them because they're by themselves. So I think what you speak to is super important, because I do think it leads to anxiety and depression. Does it lead to narcissistic personality disorder? What makes a personality disorder develop is so children are super resilient. I know I'm talking like a million miles a minute. Children are super resilient. They come up with these strategies to get through really like difficult upbringings. So if they have a parent that's super neglectful, they may learn that it benefits them to keep quiet about every single emotion that they have, never share it. It works for them then. The problem is that as they get older, and let's say now they're adults and they have a family, if they continue to use that coping mechanism when the context is no longer the same, so it's not needed anymore, they start to hit a wall. Things aren't working anymore. So it's when those strategies are, this is the difference between toxic patterns and narcissistic personality disorder. Having the awareness through therapy, let's say like, oh, I didn't realize that I keep everything stuffed inside. That's why this isn't working. That's why that's not working. That's why I have difficulty here. I don't want that anymore. I need to change this. Not that it's not difficult, but I need to change this. Whereas with narcissistic personality disorder, that's never going to be if you don't like it, that's your problem, leave.
Right. Right. Okay. I see the difference that you're bringing up here. And I have a million more questions about narcissistic personality disorder, but just because we do have a lot of young girls who listen to the show, and who are in my community as followers, you bring up this anxiety and depression, like that you felt like in your own practice was an epidemic. And I've seen so many crazy statistics out there. And my husband and I were talking about, because we're actually pregnant right now
Hey.
with a girl, and we have two boys at home, and we were talking about this research that's come out about how girls in
so
the
scared to have
newest
girls.
generation is like more anxious, more depressed, not only than ever before, but also more so than their male counterpart.
Yes.
I'm curious to hear what you have to say about, why is it a sex thing? Why are girls or women, young girls, more anxious and depressed than their male counterparts? And why now more than ever? Is it social media? Is it our parenting? Is it a combination of a variety of different things?
So I don't work with kids, but what I can tell you is that there's always been this gap between girls, boys, men, women with anxiety and depression. And part of it has always been the way it's manifested, right? So women tended to, not as much of it, women tended to, let's say, be more, quote, emotional, go to therapy more, talk about their feelings more. It was less stigmatized than, say, a male counterpart doing it. And obviously that's changing, but men tend to manifest anxiety and depression as anger, agitation, more kind of physical in nature, substance abuse. Not that women don't also, but men, it manifests a little bit differently. Maybe, also, well, women too, but physical health symptoms, right? So I know for me, if I get super anxious and stressed, I may not acknowledge that I'm anxious and stressed, but I'll instantly get neck pains and migraines. And so I know that's my body telling me relax and slow down. And so I think that it really depends on how it manifests. As far as why now, I really do truly, and I know the researchers too, think social media has done an absolute number on us, adults and children. I mean, my middle daughter is 8 going on 18. And the things that she knows, the things that she understands, and the way that she is concerned, the things that she's concerned about are so upsetting to me.
Yeah.
Because it's more than just What if someone makes fun of me because of my hair or my shoes? It's like magnified by a million. And I by no means parent in a very like, like it's okay. Come here. I don't parent like that. I'm pretty like rigid and I'm open, I'm blunt with them and I'm not very super, super mushy. And so I let them handle their emotions. I encourage them to handle their emotions. I let them know they can talk to me, but I see it with my kids and I don't parent that way. So I really do believe in social media. The way I say this all the time, if I had that when I was in college or high school,
Yeah.
I would have been in serious trouble. I mean, my 8-year-old will know if she's left out of plans. And I have to explain to her that you're not going to be included, and that is not synonymous with somebody not liking you. I
Yeah.
mean, these are the things before that, you would have no idea if somebody was out with somebody else. They're not posting
That's the
TikToks.
thing.
They're
It's
not
like
posting,
people are
you
like, how do I get
know,
through this FOMO of not like being on social media all the time or like taking a break? And it's like,
yeah, I
oh,
feel it. And I'm an adult. I can't imagine how she is.
it's horrible. It's hard to wrap your brain around that as a kid. So I completely agree with you. And the fact that the research is there to prove it. I mean, there's really no, you know,
No, I mean, and I also do think social media is a playground for narcissism. I mean, it really, really is because you're dealing with if you really think about it, I mean, even on like stupid things I'll post. I mean, and I'll admit it, like I will rarely post something without cropping, editing a little. I mean,
yeah,
I I just do because it's there. And so, it does affect you because then when you look at yourself in the mirror or a regular picture, like, this is what I look like. Like,
totally.
what?
Totally. I hear that. So it can
And
be
other people are looking at you,
right. Exactly.
thinking everything's great and whatnot. But you know what I mean? Like everything's great and wonderful because that's all you're putting up. You don't put up your first selfie.
Right. You don't, you're
No,
controlling the way people
the
perceive
narrative.
you. And so just to wrap up this specific conversation, whether you are a teen, young girl, or you're an adult woman, like the two of us are, what are the limits? What's a normal amount of time spent on these apps that's healthy for us, where we can walk away saying, I still have self-connection. I still can listen to my own body. I can still, you know, walk away and not feel super anxious.
But what do I tell people or what do I do? Two very different things.
Well,
Well, I tell people to check their social media once in the morning and then once like around dinner time, but never a couple hours before bed.
yep.
I tell them to, don't have their Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever it is, Instagram on their home screen. If
Yep.
you need to go in, you go in, you log in, you download again, like you do all of that. I do none of that, right? Like I do, I was laughing at myself last night. I'm sitting in bed scrolling on TikTok, like laughing at myself because I'm like, this is
I
exactly what I
know.
tell people not to do. Um, you want to take breaks, right? You want to take social media breaks. And I actually do that. I will take like 48 hours off here and there, but it's difficult, especially when your work is
On
on
there.
there. It's hard. It's hard.
I will say that though, the breaks, because when I first started my online business and I was trying to grow and all that stuff, like it felt impossible. It was like
Yes.
my husband would say, "Why don't you just take a break this week?" And I'm like, I can't do it.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
everything will crumble and fall apart. And then all of a sudden, I started doing one day, and then 2 days, and then a
Yeah.
week, and then two. And finally, I did one. Started like in 2021. That was 6 weeks long, and I realized that my business didn't crumble when I
Yeah.
took a 6 week break. And I'm
Yep.
like, wow, this was so refreshing. There was so much peace in this, and I can do this anytime I want, whether it's a
That's
day
huge.
or whatever. So I love that you say that because it doesn't all fall apart when you do.
No, it doesn't. And in order to be able to believe that, you can't just think your way into believing that. You actually have to engage in the behavior to give yourself the new experience of seeing that nothing falls apart. Because I could sit here and tell you, don't worry, nothing will fall apart. That's not going to do anything. But until you actually experience it, then you know.
Hi, I'm Kelly Namiro, your host, certified holistic hormone coach, and Pilates instructor for the WBK method. You can consider me your guide in helping you curate the very best version of yourself from the inside out. Feeling physically better by optimizing your hormones to feeling mentally and emotionally better by creating a more deep and grounded connection with yourself. I get questions all the time in my DMs about things like, what supplements should I be taking for my menopause symptoms? Or is it normal that I'm always exhausted? My doctor said that's what happens as I get older. Or maybe I gained 20 pounds in the last couple of years and I have no idea how to lose it. And even I'm chronically bloated and I've tried every elimination diet. Please help. But here's the thing. There are no quick fixes out there. Until you know the root cause of what's going on in your body and you use precision supplementation, a targeted diet, and mindset and lifestyle changes that are specific to your unique circumstances and lab values, you're never going to be able to heal. Throwing just random supplements that make all these promises or a restrictive diet at a weight issue is never going to work because it's not focused on what's going on internally with you. And often we can make the problem worse when we do these things. And that's why I've created the WBK Lab Review Package. In this package, you'll receive lab kits and a custom lab form based on your symptoms and health history. Once you've completed the saliva kit for your adrenals, the stool kit for your gut health, and the blood tests for your hormones and other health markers, we'll sit down together and create a customized plan that will help you balance your hormones in a holistic way so that you can lose weight, have more energy, maintain a balanced mood, and achieve the results that you've been wanting. This year, it is time to get the results that you've been dreaming of because you're targeting your unique system. If you're ready to experience more energy, comfort, confidence in your body, and relief from those nagging symptoms that have been bringing you down, I would love to support you in doing just that. This program includes a one-on-one call between you and me, all of the labs needed to create your customized protocol, and a PDF with your unique plan that you'll be following going forward so that you can take your time in implementing your new diet, supplements, and lifestyle changes. To learn more about this, head to the link in the show notes or go to wellnessbykelly.com to learn more about the WBK Lab Review. So going back to this idea of the narcissist, right? And like also continuing on the conversation we're having with this like anxiety and depression. My guess is that any of these, patients that you're dealing with, they're going to have that as a huge issue that manifests for them when they're dealing with this partner who is mentally abusive. I'm wondering too, like, do narcissists often have the behavior of physical abuse, or is it mostly just the mental abuse of like trying to tear someone's confidence and, connection with themselves down?
So two answers to that. The first is yes, they are physically abusive, emotionally abusive. They are sexually abusive. They're financially abusive. They are all of the above.
Talk about financially abusive.
So financially abusive is anything under the umbrella of you don't have the passwords to any of your accounts. You don't even know what accounts you have. You don't have access to them. You get a quote, Now, I know there's a lot of families that have there's a certain amount of money put into a joint account versus this, or, the mom is not working and staying home with the kids at the time. She has an account, the other spouse puts their money. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about having to call your spouse from Sephora asking them if you can buy lipstick.
Yeah.
Okay. Like brutal control over finances. Nothing is in your name, or there is so much in your name and you have no idea, and you are in so much debt and you have no idea. Your credit is destroyed. You have no idea.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously that type of control and what you were saying about emotional, physical, like, is going to make somebody feel anxious and depressed, right? And so what are these patients of yours doing about that? Like, what can they do about that? And also, you talked briefly about how that can, like, for you, anxiety manifests in like these physical symptoms. And I've seen in your social media and interviews that you've done, you talk about how like dealing with these narcissists can actually manifest in physical symptoms. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and many of your listeners have probably heard this, that trauma, right? We feel it in our bodies. It is stored in our tissue. It is stored in our muscle. It's not just emotional. Our brains and our bodies and our moods, they are all interconnected. And to think anything else is extremely dangerous. So they're all connected. If you think about autoimmune diseases, one of the primary reasons why MS would flare up or, lupus would flare, any of them, because of stress and inflammation. So anytime you're inflamed, right? Anytime your cortisol levels are high, you're going to put yourself at risk for getting sick. So, that's why after something really traumatic happens or something big happens, it doesn't even have to be traumatic. It could be something cute. Like when I finished many years ago, when I got my doctorate and I finally graduated, and I remember getting in the mail that you passed the state board, you passed the national licensing exam. The next morning, it was like 10 years of flu caught up with me. Like, it's just, your body just crumbles once once that trauma is kind of like just over, let's say, or you go through something which isn't so much an isolated event, but it's this culmination of these small, we hear about complex PTSD, these small little traumas, daily, chronic. We see this in domestic violence all the time, long-term domestic violence, where, people will be in these relationships and they will have bizarre pain symptoms, autoimmune diseases. They will have neck pain, joint pain, IBS. They will have cardiac conditions. Their cancer rates go up. Like, literally everything is escalated because you are living in a chronic state of fight or flight. And so when your body is, our bodies and brains are not conditioned to live in a constant state of trauma, which is why COVID left so many of us feeling totally foggy and just like, what year is it? Where are we? Who am I? What's my name? Still, because our brains are not meant to live like that. So when you're living in that state of constant trauma, never knowing, what you're going to get, walking on eggshells, your cortisol levels are just constantly through the roof. And when you live like that, your body is absolutely 100% not going to be well. The inflammation's off the charts and everything is out of whack. Everything.
Yeah.
You lose years.
Yeah. I think that just goes to show the impact of this like mind body connection, and how truly powerful it is for the people out there who don't believe in it, because there are the naysayers out there that I still hear from. And so I think that's super powerful. And so if, like, I know, somebody has to do probably years of work.
Yeah.
They're struggling or dealing with somebody like this. But if you are somebody who's dealing with like the anxiety of like walking on eggshells, because I even have talked to clients in my work of like, oh, I'm so nervous. Like, I don't know what I'm going to get from my partner tonight. Like, even if it's not a narcissistic situation, what can these women, and I'm not just saying women, what can these people do?
Mm-hmm. So I always tell people to look for what they can control.
Okay.
And it can be something as basic as your breathing. Because you just need to have something that you have 100% control over to be able to anchor yourself in the present moment. And anchoring yourself in the present moment is so powerful and so empowering because it's something that nobody else can take from you. And when you're in these relationships where you have zero control, to be able to have something that is yours that nobody can take from you, it's like the tiniest seed to starting to build that confidence and that empowerment. And what also happens in these narcissistic relationships that I work with people on is I have them start to see the patterns. Like, there's this very distinct blueprint with narcissistic abuse, and it is pretty much identical across the board, no matter who you are. And when they start to be able to see that pattern or that blueprint, it gives them this sense of control because now things start to be predictable. And once you have a sense of predictability, you can kind of control what your responses are.
Okay.
Because you know that response A is going to result in their response B.
And so I'm curious because I'm guessing you don't, I want to ask like a clarifying question. Like, when we think about, controlling what you can, I'm guessing you're not saying to like just please them in that moment however you can, or just because that's never going to get you where you want to be either, because that's just going to create more anxiety. So
Yeah. So, it depends on the context, right? So let's say, for example, that you have a partner that is escalating, okay, that they're getting scary. They have a history of violence with you and you're scared. You do whatever you can in that situation to keep yourself safe. And in that particular situation, if it's cooking another dinner for them because you're scared that they're gonna like lose their mind and they're threatening to hurt you, right? Like, and you can't get out or call the police. Like I know it sounds backwards, but safety's first in those situations. And so I always tell people, whatever you need to do, if you need to tell them you love them and like inside
yeah,
you're dying,
yeah,
but it's going to de-escalate them, great. Or, if they're screaming at the top of their lungs, I always tell people don't match them where they're at. You stay neutral no matter if they're here or they're low, they're high, screaming, crying, it doesn't matter. You stay neutral because they get that supply from being able to dictate your emotions by their emotions. And so if you give them neutrality, you really give them nothing.
yeah. And does that frustrate them more?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it does. But what it also does is it gives you a sense of empowerment and control.
So for those of our listeners out there, because I think that, again, I only work with women, so that's why I keep saying
Yeah.
women. But I think that from working with women, from my own past experience, I think that a lot of us can tend into that like people pleasing behavior, even in our most intimate relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And because we've been talking about this like whole, you're the expert in, narcissism. And I think that we can all learn from you too, tools that might be helpful in terms of creating healthier boundaries in relationships. One, how do we know if we are people pleasing? And two, give me like 2 or 3 tips to create healthier boundaries in our relationships.
Yeah. So, people pleasing, I think sometimes gets a really bad reputation
Yeah.
because I don't think it's always a bad thing. Like
Right.
I think there's something nice to be said for wanting to please your partner or wanting to please your friend or a colleague. Like, I don't know. I like doing things, right? Like
For other
we're human.
people.
We like
Yeah.
doing things for other people. I think where it becomes an issue is when that level of wanting to please people causes dysfunction in your own behavior in your own life. So it depends on what I call the function of it. If I'm doing something for you and it's because I saw something that I know you're going to love and I know you've been in a bad mood, so I bought it for you. And like, here you go. I want absolutely nothing in return. Like, I was thinking of you. You deserve this. Like, have fun, right? But if I do it, and the reason why I'm doing it is out of my own discomfort, that if I don't, you'll be mad at me. If I don't, you won't love me anymore. If I don't, you'll drop me or you'll whatever the case may be, right? Then the function of me buying something from you is to remove something uncomfortable from me. And that's when the people pleasing becomes dysfunctional
Super helpful. So it's like,
rather
what's
than
the
toterating
fear?
your own shit, so to
Yes.
speak.
Like, I'm not doing this because I enjoy giving to you. I'm doing this because I'm afraid if I don't.
Yes. Yes. Now, people will say, okay, but if you were a kid growing up and you didn't do X, Y, and Z for your parent because you were scared you were going to get hit, that's different. But when you take that pattern of people pleasing and bring it into adulthood where you're not going to hit me, but I still think you're going to in some way be angry at me or dissatisfied, that's still that pattern.
Right. Right. Okay. So how do we create a healthier boundary?
Yeah. So I think the first is you have to ask yourself in the moment,
Why?
the underlying why. Why am I doing this? Why am I buying this? And if I don't do this behavior, what immediately comes up for me? And if it's a feeling of like total, like, oh my God, I'm going to throw up, then that's your stuff. And then that's when I tell people that, I work with them on learning to sit with it. And so strategies to sit with your discomfort are anything from breathing to ground yourself, or acknowledging that you're having that feeling. So I do this thing called worry art, where I'll have somebody sit with that discomfort, let's say for 60 seconds.
Mhm.
And then I say, okay, make a list of all these adjectives. If that feeling had a name, if it had a color, if it had a shape, if it had a smell, if it had a sound, what would it be? And so then they'll describe it. And so then when that feeling comes up for them again, now they have this objective image that they can look at rather than being all intertwined with their stuff. It feels less jarring for them.
I love that as a tool. I've never heard anyone like
It's
describe
called
that.
cognitive diffusion. There's just so many ways you can do it, but it takes the you and your thoughts and it separates it. It's like watching your thoughts. It's like watching a sporting event as a spectator rather than being in the match itself.
I love that. That's super helpful for anyone who's like out there and trying to make that, distinction or understand their feelings more. I think a lot of people have
Yeah.
never done therapy before. And so getting that clarity is super helpful.
Yeah. And I think people think they have to understand why they feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest with you, in the moment, I'm not so sure it matters what developmental history you had with your parents as to why you're feeling this right now. I think, yeah, you can hit on that, but I think the most important thing is to acknowledge that you're feeling it, and in that same moment, engage in a behavior that's consistent with the things that you value.
And how you can feel different versus continuing to
Yes,
in behavior. I think
exactly.
that's really, really helpful. I think that's so much of therapy, because I've done a ton of therapy in my years alone and then with my husband. And so much of it is so focused on like, okay, this is why you are the way you are, why you are the way you are, why you are the way you are.
Yep.
But it's like, but I don't want to be
Now
this
what?
anymore.
Yes.
Like, how do I
Right.
change that? Which I think,
I cannot tell you how many, and listen, there's a place for that. Don't get me wrong. Like it's
sure.
helpful, but I get so many people that, okay, like I know why I do what I do. Like I know I'm like this because of my mom. I know I'm like this because my dad was an alcoholic. I know why I do what I do, and I could tell you everything that I do. But how do I change it? Like, what
Yes.
do I do now with all this information? And so that's why exercises like that are really helpful, because it's not that they neglect that stuff, but it just in the moment, it really just doesn't matter
Doesn't matter.
at
So
that moment.
in your new podcast, we were talking about this off mic. You're going to have this podcast that you're launching. Was it, did you say next week?
Hopefully next week. Hopefully it'll be up next week. 2 weeks, I should say.
Hopefully by the time this episode comes out,
Yes.
your podcast will be launched.
Yes.
Talk about because I'm wondering, like, are you only talking about specifically narcissism? Are you going to talk about a variety of mental health issues? Like, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it's called Next Up Narcissism, but it is primarily about narcissism, but it's actually more so about exactly what you brought up, which was, yes, narcissism, but like not just about love bombing and all these things that these words now have been out for, but emotionally, like what is happening to people who are in these abusive relationships? Like, how is this affecting them as far as anxiety and depression? And what can they do to navigate the anxiety and the depression? Yes, in addition to setting boundaries in the abuse and getting out of the relationship, but how do you manage your anxiety and depression when you come to the realization at 50 years old that your mom is a narcissist, right? Or that your parent, your dad, or that you work with somebody who's a narcissist, or you were in a narcissistic relationship at 18 and still at 40 it's affecting you, and how do you deal with this? And so I really want to look at, really honestly, a lot of the things you touched on: the anxiety, the depression, the physical, the medical stuff that comes out of this, sleep, appetite, all of it, because it's really kind of like a holistic approach. It has to be.
100%. When I think about like your book too, that you have, Find Your Calm, I mean, I think that is also helpful for people in terms of, okay, I've gone through this situation. I'm been through a trauma, and it's what's interesting that I've learned in the last year or so is that trauma isn't necessarily the same for one. Like I always thought like, I don't have trauma. Like I was never sexually abused, or I never went through, all of these like PTSD, like things that we hear about, but people can have trauma that's like micro trauma or
Yeah.
trauma specifically for them that impacts their everyday. And so can anyone use this book?
Yeah, so you don't have to have trauma to have anxiety or
Sure.
depression, and not everything you have. I think sometimes people feel like because nothing big happened to them, that what they're experiencing, big in terms of this massive trauma, that their anxiety therefore is like almost like not warranted. Like it's like
Yes.
you're not allowed to have it because nothing bad happened to them. And like that's just flat out not true. Like that's just not true.
It's like
Nothing
the
has to.
shame around the anxiety makes the whole
Yes.
situation even.
Yes. It's like you're judging your judgment. Like
Yeah.
it's you're judging your judgment of yourself. And I mean, you know, it, nothing has to happen for you to feel depressed. And one of the things that I hear so frequently that makes my blood boil is when, somebody will say, um, "Oh, I'm so I can't get out of bed," or so, and someone will say, like, "What do you have to be depressed about?" Like, right, like you have a healthy kid, or you have a happy marriage, and it's like, I remember this was how I mean, God, this is probably about like 8 years ago. So I lost a baby. It was probably like 14 weeks along. It was horrible. It was traumatic. It was absolutely the worst thing that I've gone through. And at the time, I had my two older ones. And I remember multiple people, and it was with good intentions, but multiple people. I couldn't get out of bed for like a month. I was a disaster. And I remember multiple people saying to me, "You should be grateful that you have two healthy children." And let me tell you what that did to me. Not only did it make me feel like a horrible mother and a selfish human being for being that depressed when I quote shouldn't have been, because I have two other healthy kids. And I remember in that moment thinking, like, I have the tools to kind of weasel my way out of that line of thinking because it's what I do. But it was so hard for me to do that. Like, I can't imagine somebody who doesn't have those tools, because it's hard for me. Like, I needed help to deal with that. So I just think people have good intentions, but I think that people often minimize their and other people's like like almost like they're allowing them to have anxiety. Yes, you don't have to have a reason. Just be anxious.
I like love that you brought this up because this is so speaking of like the whole, pregnancy loss and all of that. So that was something my husband and I went through. In April of last year, we lost baby at 9 weeks. And then this pregnancy that I have right now was actually twins. And we lost one of the twins.
Oh, oh,
So going through all that, we didn't announce this pregnancy until I was 20
I
weeks
get it. I get it. Yeah.
because of the anxiety. And I had people say the exact same
Yeah.
thing. Oh, well, you have two more at home. Just be grateful. And it's like, no, no, no. Like you don't
It's like,
understand.
I want this one.
There's so many complexities
Yeah.
around. I
Yeah.
feel like I should be enjoying this and I'm not.
Yes.
I feel like this could have been my fault and maybe it is, or like
Yes.
there are so many things that go through your mind. And
Yep.
so even just the things that people say to you can
Yep.
be traumatic all on top of the loss. And so
Yep.
I think you sharing that just makes people feel so much
Yeah. I
better.
mean, we're human. We are not wired to be happy all the time. We'd all be dead.
Yes. Yes.
Like, like it sounds great, but I mean, if we didn't have anxiety, we'd walk across the street and get hit by a car because we wouldn't look both ways. Like it's a naturally occurring emotion. So we're constantly fighting it, that by fighting it, you make it worse
Right.
rather than sitting with it. And so, again, I don't think people say those things to be hurtful.
No.
I think it's just they don't know what to say,
Right.
but it still doesn't lessen the impact it has, right? Like, I wasn't happy being pregnant with my third. I was a disaster because until she was out,
Yes.
I wasn't okay
You're worried the entire time.
the entire time.
I hear you on that. And I think that like what you've said, like, and if we can like, especially not like on the narcissism piece, but just on the anxiety piece of like through the thread through this whole conversation that I can pull through is sitting with it, because
Yeah.
that's what's helped me is like, I think an older past version of me go to social media to numb, go to online shopping to numb, go do anything
Yep.
else to not feel it. But sitting with it is what's been the most helpful because
And
then
it goes away faster,
100%,
you
100%.
know? But I get it. I mean, I did it too, right? Like it's what I always say, we're human. Like none of us handle everything well. We just don't.
I think that that gives people so much permission to feel the discomfort and the uncomfortable emotions. The last question that I wrap my episodes with is, you, just from talking to you, you have so much, you have a practice, you have your book, you have your podcast, you have 3 kids. Like, how do you balance all of the kids?
I don't. I really don't.
The honesty in that answer is so good.
I mean, I honestly, it sounds so cliche, but I play a ton of tennis because it's the only place I feel like just
Not thinking about it all.
not, no, just so present. And it's just like, I don't know. I like being in that competitive zone. I don't know. It's really good for me. That's what I do. And I don't mean like you should exercise. You find whatever it is that you like. If it's drawing, draw. If it's like, going like antiquing, great. Like just find something that you enjoy doing, not something that you think you're supposed to enjoy doing.
Beautiful.
Like,
I think that so many people think it's like, oh, I should
go
be
to
the
the
person
gym.
that meditates. I should be the person that goes to the gym. And it's like, no. Find the thing that you get lost in
Yes,
where time
I
goes by
love that.
and you're present and it doesn't matter what else is going on in the
Yeah.
world. I think that's
I find when I don't play tennis, my days are a lot harder to get through just because it's like I don't feel as good.
yeah.
Um, how do I balance? Honestly, I have a lot of like I have a lot of babysitters, I'm being honest. Like, I have a lot of college girls. Like I need an extra set of hands. Like I need help. I have 3 kids that are all at different places. I need like someone. It's like you can't forget about the practical stuff, right? Like I enlist my parents, I enlist friends, I like use my resources. So it's not even just like it's not like taking bubble baths and like treating yourself to dessert. It's literally finding somebody to drive your child home from dance.
I think that is like one of the best tips that we've gotten though, because it's like people are scared to ask for help and like, no, you will be so much better able to balance it than if
I
you.
mean, it's true. Like, honestly, I know this sounds so ridiculous and like not clinical in nature, but like finding my daughter a ride home from dance made my night so much calmer than any bath could ever do.
Love it. I love it. I think that's absolutely like the best thing, like one of the best tips of like these last questions that I've ever know. It's practical and it's real.
Yeah, I mean,
Everybody find you, Dr. Zuckerman.
um, I'm on Instagram, Dr. Z Psychologist. I post a lot of this stuff on there, tips and strategies. Again, not just about narcissism, but anxiety, depression, things like that. My website's drjamiezuckerman.com, and that's more for the narcissistic abuse coaching. And then for general therapy, anxiety, depression, stress, things like that, relationship issues, the zgrouptherapy.com.
Amazing. Everyone go listen to her podcast when it comes out.
Yay.
We'll actually link that in the show notes. I'll make
Awesome.
out after your show and we'll drop that and
Thank you.
website and everything else in there. But thank you so much for your time. This has been
Thank you.
Awesome episode.
I really hope that you enjoyed that episode. You can follow me on Instagram at Wellness by Kelly or head over to our website, wellnessbykelly.com. Sign up now for the Wellness by Kelly 7-day free trial on our app or head over to our course and now get 20% off the course or 10% off of the membership with the code Balancing Chaos, all one word, BALANCINGCHAOS. In our course, you'll get access to an emailed lab review plus protocols built out to help you heal with whatever hormonal imbalance you're struggling with. With our membership, you'll receive a library of content with our app with low impact workouts, blood sugar balancing recipes, and mindfulness meditations, all designed to help you balance your hormones and help you feel like you are living your most beautiful, joyful, and vital life. If you like the show, please leave a rating and review. That is the best way to help the show grow and get to more listeners. We hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next week.